There is a moment, quiet, raw, and often lonely, when you realize the person who hurt you won't come back with remorse, won't offer closure, and won't say the words your heart is still aching to hear. And in that moment, you are forced to confront a brutal, beautiful truth. Healing doesn't wait for an apology. Growth doesn't require understanding. And your worth was never theirs to confirm. When we talk about vulnerability, it's often misunderstood. It's seen as something fragile, something weak, something to be ashamed of. We're told not to let people see our soft spots, not to give anyone the opportunity to use our emotions against us. But that's not what vulnerability really is. Vulnerability is not weakness. It is one of the most courageous acts a human being can engage in. To open your heart in a world that constantly tells you to guard it is a quiet kind of revolution. It means you've chosen to show up fully, even when you knew there were no guarantees. That is not a flaw. That is your superpower. When you loved, you did it with an open heart. When you trusted, you did it with the belief that connection is sacred. When you shared your truth, you didn't just offer words. You offered a part of yourself. You allowed yourself to be seen, not as a curated version or a filtered highlight, but as a whole, breathing, feeling person. And even though that openness wasn't met with the care and respect it deserved, that does not diminish the strength it took to stand there, emotionally exposed, and say, "This is me." You were not wrong for showing up in love, for speaking with honesty, for asking to be seen. That was courage. That was integrity. That was everything the world needs more of. There's this lie that gets planted after emotional pain, especially when the person who hurt you walks away, blames you, or acts like your pain is an inconvenience. The lie whispers, you shouldn't have let them in. You shouldn't have been so trusting. You shouldn't have felt so deeply. But that lie only grows in the absence of truth. And the truth is this: what you offered was a gift. What you gave was rare. And the fact that someone mishandled it is not an indictment of your character. It is a reflection of their inability to meet you where you were. Vulnerability isn't what hurt you. Their response to it did. You see, vulnerability doesn't make you weak. It makes you honest. It makes you authentic. It puts you in alignment with yourself. It allows you to live without masks, without armor, without the exhausting burden of pretending. Yes, it exposes you to pain, but it also opens the door to joy, to real connection, to purpose, to belonging. You can't selectively numb emotions. If you numb vulnerability, you numb love, you numb meaning, you numb the very essence of what it means to be alive. And yet, after being hurt, it's common to want to retreat, to shut down, to decide that the best way to protect yourself is to never let anyone in again. That makes sense. Pain tells us to hide. It tells us that if we just build higher walls, no one will ever reach the parts of us that still ache. But here's the problem. Those walls don't just keep out the hurt. They also keep out the healing. They keep out the new connections. They keep out the unexpected laughter, the deep conversations, the kind of love that actually knows how to hold you. And in trying to avoid pain, you end up avoiding life. The fact that you were willing to love, to hope, to believe in someone else's goodness, even if they didn't rise to meet you, is a sign of extraordinary emotional strength. It means you were brave enough to go where many are too afraid to tread. It means that your heart still chooses to beat despite having been bruised. That kind of strength doesn't make headlines, but it's what holds this world together. It's what builds communities, repairs relationships, and transforms grief into growth. In a culture that often rewards detachment, sarcasm, and emotional numbness, choosing to be soft is revolutionary. Choosing to care deeply when it would be easier to disconnect is not weakness. It's leadership. It's clarity. It's a refusal to let the pain of the past dictate the shape of your future. Every time you choose vulnerability again, every time you decide to speak your truth, set a boundary, ask for what you need, or say, "I love you," without knowing what will come next, you are choosing to live fully. You are choosing to bet on yourself. And yes, it's hard. Vulnerability is risky. It's exposing. But what's the alternative? Living half present, half loved, half alive. That's not safety. That's a slow surrender. The goal isn't to stop feeling. It's to feel and survive. It's to feel and grow. It's to feel and still believe that connection is worth it, because it is. You're not broken because someone didn't recognize your value. You're not too much because someone couldn't meet your depth. You're not foolish because you offered love where it wasn't held. What you are is bold. What you are is resilient. What you are is someone who refuses to close their heart just because someone else couldn't hold it with care. Vulnerability is not the problem. It's the path. It's the path back to yourself. It's the path to the kind of relationships that nourish rather than drain. It's the path to finding people who aren't scared of your truth, who see your openness as beauty, not as burden. And more than anything, it's the path to a life that is not only survived, but deeply, intentionally, joyfully lived. So the next time you find yourself regretting your vulnerability, remember this. It was never the thing that failed you. It was the bravest part of you, the part that still believes in honesty, the part that still believes in love, the part that refuses to harden, even in a world that tells you to stay quiet, stay semi-guarded. And that part of you, that part is unstoppable. When someone causes harm and walks away like nothing happened, it can leave you feeling like you're the only one carrying the emotional weight. They move on as if you were never part of their story, while you're left behind with unanswered questions, shattered trust, and a deep ache in your chest. The silence can be deafening, the lack of closure confusing, and in that silence, a cruel narrative can begin to form that maybe they didn't care at all, that maybe you imagined the connection, or worse, that your pain is yours alone to carry. But what's happening beneath their surface is often far more complicated than it appears. They don't walk away untouched. What they bury becomes their burden, and what they deny becomes their quiet torment. People who hurt others without acknowledging it are not free of the consequences of their actions. They're simply running from them. Their refusal to confront the truth isn't a sign of peace. It's a symptom of internal chaos they are unwilling to face. When someone hurts you and avoids accountability, it's not because they are incapable of feeling guilt or shame. It's because feeling it would require them to confront parts of themselves they've spent their entire lives hiding from. Parts they fear will unravel their carefully built identity. They may not show it. They may act indifferent, confident, even self-righteous. But appearances can be deceiving. Just because someone doesn't visibly express guilt doesn't mean it's not there. Guilt doesn't always scream. It festers. Shame doesn't always cry, it hardens. And the people who are the most disconnected from the consequences of their actions are often the ones who carry the heaviest emotional debt, buried under layers of denial, projection, and avoidance. When someone refuses to acknowledge the hurt they've caused, it doesn't mean they're unaffected. It means they lack the emotional tools or maturity to deal with the truth. It's easier for them to suppress the reality than to face the discomfort of their own behavior. They may convince themselves that they were justified, that you overreacted, that your feelings were exaggerated, because accepting the truth would require them to admit they were careless with something sacred, another human heart. The shame they carry may be buried so deep they don't even recognize it consciously. But it's there. It leaks out in the form of defensiveness, coldness, distraction, or the compulsive need to maintain control. They may keep themselves busy, dive into work, seek constant validation, or jump into new relationships to avoid sitting still long enough to feel what they've avoided. But none of these distractions erase the truth. The truth has a way of finding people even in silence, especially in silence. You, on the other hand, were brave enough to feel. You were courageous enough to sit in the pain, to cry, to question, to process, to begin healing. While they numbed and avoided, you grew. That doesn't mean it was fair. It doesn't mean you didn't deserve an apology. But it does mean you've chosen the path of transformation instead of stagnation. And that choice is not just brave, it's revolutionary. Their silence is not your fault. Their lack of accountability is not your responsibility. You are not meant to carry both the wound and the weight of their unspoken guilt. Emotional responsibility belongs to the one who caused the harm, not to the one who had the courage to feel it. And while they bury the truth to protect their ego, you are learning to hold the truth to protect your future. We often think that healing requires validation from the one who hurt us. That without their acknowledgement, our pain isn't real or our story isn't finished. But the truth is their validation isn't needed to confirm your experience. You were there. You lived it. You felt the shift in energy, the subtle gaslighting, the abandonment in the moments you most needed to be held. That reality doesn't lose its meaning just because they refuse to speak it. You don't need them to say the words for the truth to remain true. What they secretly feel, but will likely never admit, is regret, even if it's wrapped in denial. They may not regret what they did in the way you want them to, but somewhere inside, they regret losing access to someone who offered authenticity, empathy, and love. They regret being seen so deeply and then rejecting that very reflection. Because people who are disconnected from their emotions often crave the very connection they sabotage. They want closeness without vulnerability, power without responsibility, love without accountability. And when it slips through their fingers, they may not have the tools to name the grief, but they carry it nonetheless. The irony is that in trying to avoid shame, they deepen it. In refusing to face guilt, they perpetuate it. And while they act like they've moved on, part of them is still stuck in the moment they walked away from something real. You may not see their suffering, and you may never hear the apology, but that doesn't mean they're at peace. It means they've become experts at emotional avoidance. But avoidance doesn't equal freedom. It's just another form of self-imprisonment. You, on the other hand, have chosen something rare. You've chosen to turn inward instead of lashing outward. You've chosen to feel, to grow, to question, and to become more of yourself in the aftermath. That's real strength. The kind that builds emotional intelligence. The kind that fosters resilience. The kind that ensures that even if they never acknowledge your pain, you still rise. In the end, their refusal to feel their shame is not a reflection of your worth. Their silence doesn't mean you don't matter. It means they are not ready to face the emotional mirror your truth holds up to them. And that's okay. You don't need to carry the silence anymore. You don't need to wonder if they secretly feel anything, because what they feel is not your responsibility. Your responsibility is to your own healing, your own truth, and the powerful, beautiful life you're building in the aftermath. It's natural to want closure after someone hurts you. When something ends abruptly, dishonestly, or without acknowledgement, your mind craves resolution. You replay conversations. You question your worth. You wonder what you missed, what you did wrong, and whether the connection you thought was real ever actually existed. One of the most painful realizations is that the person who caused the wound may never offer the one thing your heart is atching for, a genuine apology. And without it, healing can feel impossible. But here's the radical, life-altering truth. Your healing was never meant to depend on their ability to do right by you. Your peace is not tied to their apology. We are conditioned to believe that in order to move forward, we need someone to acknowledge the harm they caused. We wait. We hope. We fantasize about the day they wake up, realize the damage they've done, and come back with open hands and open hearts, finally ready to make amends. But when that moment never comes, we get stuck in a cycle of emotional paralysis. We remain tethered to the story, not because we haven't suffered enough, but because we believe we need their permission to close the book. The truth is, some people will never apologize. Not because you don't deserve it, but because they don't have the capacity to own what they've done. Apologizing requires self-awareness. It requires humility. It requires emotional maturity. And most of all, it requires a level of empathy that many people have never developed. For some, admitting fault feels like weakness. For others, it feels like a threat to their self-image. And so, instead of leaning into discomfort, they avoid it entirely. They rationalize, they project. They rewrite the story in their mind in a way that lets them walk away without guilt. When we tie our healing to their ability to do the right thing, we hand them the keys to our emotional freedom. We say, I can't be whole again unless you show me that I mattered. But here's the truth that might be hard to swallow: you already mattered. Your pain was already valid. And waiting for someone else to confirm it only keeps you stuck in the story they abandoned. Real closure doesn't come from them. It comes from you. It comes from the moment you decide that your peace is more important than their admission. It comes when you stop seeking justice from someone who refuses to acknowledge their role in your hurt. It's in the moment you realize that you can grieve what happened, honor your emotions, and still choose to move forward, even without the ending you deserved. That doesn't mean you're excusing what happened. It doesn't mean you're letting anyone off the hook. Choosing to heal without an apology is not about forgiveness. It's about freedom. It's about saying, I no longer need you to admit the truth for me to accept it. It's about reclaiming your power. Because as long as your healing depends on their remorse, you remain entangled in their emotional dysfunction. But when you decide that you are the one responsible for your peace, you break the cycle. It's okay to feel angry that they won't apologize. It's okay to feel sad, hurt, and even hopeless at times. Those are human responses to deep emotional betrayal. But beneath those feelings is a deeper truth. You are not powerless here. You may not control their choices, but you do control what happens next. You get to decide how long you stay in the waiting room of someone else's emotional avoidance. You get to choose when to walk out of that room and into the life that's waiting for you outside of their silence. And here's the thing, healing without an apology isn't about pretending the hurt didn't happen. It's about learning how to live fully with the knowledge that it did. It's about acknowledging the wound, grieving the loss, and choosing to close the loop within yourself. It's not easy. In fact, it might be one of the hardest things you ever do. But it's also one of the most liberating. You don't need them to say sorry to know that what they did was wrong. You don't need them to explain their actions to know that you are worthy of better. You don't need them to validate your emotions for those emotions to be real. The fact that you are hurting is proof that you showed up with your heart. The fact that you are healing is proof that you are strong enough to hold it all. The love, the loss, the truth, and the future. Closure is not about tying everything up in a neat bow. It's about creating space for your next chapter. It's about deciding that the person who broke your heart doesn't get to narrate the rest of your story. You can hold the pain and still choose peace. You can carry the lesson and still release the weight. You can accept that you may never hear the words, I'm sorry, and still speak the words, I deserve better. And if you're waiting for permission to move on, let this be it. You don't need their apology to set yourself free. You don't need their explanation to trust your memory. You don't need their acknowledgement to honor your healing. You are allowed to find joy again. You are allowed to love again. You are allowed to live again without waiting for the person who hurt you to catch up with your growth. This is your life, your heart, your healing. You are not broken because they couldn't love you properly. You are not weak because you hoped for accountability. You are not less because someone else lacked the courage to face the truth. You are more aware, more grounded, more powerful than you were before. Healing without closure is not settling. It's not giving up. It's choosing yourself in a world where others refuse to. It's writing the ending of the story with your own hands, in your own voice, on your own terms. And maybe, just maybe, that's the most powerful kind of healing there is. There is a very specific kind of pain that comes from showing up with your whole heart, only to be met with coldness, distance, or rejection. It's a pain that's hard to describe because it doesn't always come from explosive betrayal. It often comes in quiet moments of absence, of emotional detachment, of being dismissed when you needed to be heard, or invalidated when you tried to express your truth. It's the kind of pain that doesn't just wound your heart. It shakes your sense of identity. It makes you question if you were too much, if you expected too much, or if you felt too deeply. But the truth is, your depth wasn't the problem. Your emotional honesty wasn't the issue. You didn't cause discomfort by being wrong. You triggered discomfort because you were real. You were willing to go places within yourself that many people avoid. You were willing to have conversations round in truth, vulnerability, and accountability. You were willing to dive deep, to see things clearly, to feel things fully. And not everyone is ready to meet that kind of clarity. When someone has spent their life avoiding vulnerability, your presence becomes mirror, reflecting back all the emotional work they've avoided. They see in you what they have hit to cultivate in themselves: emotional literacy, empathy, the courage to be fully seen. And when they see it, they don't always rise to meet you. Sometimes they shrink back. Sometimes they lash out. And sometimes they walk away, not because your depth is overwhelming, but because their shallowness has never been challenged so directly. Your emotional intensity may have made them uncomfortable, not because it was destructive, but because it was you true, because it was rooted in things they didn't want to face, either you or in themselves. They may have responded by making you feel like you were the problem, like your desire for honesty, intimacy, and accountability was unreasonable, like your expectations were too high. But those weren't expectations, they weren't expanders, and you were right to hold them. It takes strength to live with your heart wide open in a world that encourages numbness. It takes courage to say, this is what I need emotionally, and to risk being told that it's too much. And when someone tells you that your feelings are too intense or that your boundaries are inconvenient, what they're really saying is, I'm not willing to meet you where you are. That's not a judgment of your value. It's a reflection of their limits. It's easy for someone who's dictating their emotions to see your self-awareness as threatening. It's easy for them to call your clarity drama, because they've only known how to live in denial. It's easy for them to minimize your truth when they've never had to face their own. But just because it's easier for them doesn't mean it's right. And it certainly doesn't mean it's your fault. You didn't break the connection. You show up for it. You tried to speak honestly, to love fully, to listen deeply. You brought your whole self. And that's not something to be ashamed of. That's something to be proud of. You didn't settle for surface level relationships. You wanted something real, something that required presence, emotional engagement, and mutual respect. That's not too much. That's the bare minimum for a healthy connection. But in trying to be met there, you may have encountered someone who wasn't equipped, not because they're incapable of emotion, but because they've never learned how to process it. Or maybe they have, but they're still too afraid of what it might reveal. Maybe they're carrying pain they've never dealt with. Maybe they were taught that strength means staying distant. Maybe they were conditioned to equate emotional control with superiority. Whatever the reason, it has nothing to do with your value and everything to do with their unresolved patterns. It's painful to be rejected for your authenticity. It's painful to be told, directly or indirectly, that your emotional world is too complicated, intense, hard to love. But don't confuse that pain with truth. The truth is, your capacity to feel deeply is a strength, not a liability. The truth is, people who avoid depth often long for it, but they haven't yet figured out how to hold it without feeling like they're drowning. What made you different wasn't your sensitivity. It was your emotional courage. And emotional courage can be intimidating. It demands honesty. It invites growth. It exposes what's been hidden. And that kind of invitation, it's not always accepted, but that doesn't make it any less valuable. So when you look back at the moments where you were told, either through words or behavior, that you were too much, pause and ask yourself were you actually too much? Or were they not ready for someone who asked for depth? Were you really asking for too much? Or were they simply unable to give anything at all? The truth is, when you love from a place of wholeness, you naturally challenge people who still live in fragments. Your presence asks them to be honest. Your standards ask them to be responsible. Your vulnerability asks them to show up. And if they've spent their whole life hiding, running, or numbing, they may interpret that ask as an attack. But it's not. It's an invitation, one they were free to accept or decline. If they declined, that doesn't mean you were wrong to offer it. It means they weren't ready to receive it. Being too much for someone is often doing exactly what they weren't prepared for. Not everyone is ready for a real connection. Not everyone is ready to own their part, to sit in hard conversations, or to engage in reciprocal emotional labor. Some people are only prepared for what's easy, what doesn't challenge them, what doesn't grow them, and that's okay. But it doesn't mean you should shrink. You don't need to dilute your truth to make someone else feel comfortable. You don't need to downplay your needs so they don't feel pressured. You don't need to minimize your love just they haven't learned how to hold it. Your depth isn't something to hide. It's something to honor. And the right people, the emotionally available people, will not only value that depth, they'll match it. They'll meet you in it. They'll appreciate it. They'll choose to grow with you, not retreat from you. Until then, stay rooted in your truth. Stay grounded in your emotional clarity. And let someone's inability to receive love make you question your ability to give it. You didn't go too far. You simply went farther than they could follow. There are moments in life that split you in half. The moments when someone you trusted chooses to hurt you, walks away when you needed them most, or disappears without explanation. These experiences don't just break your heart, they fracture your sense of safety in the world. They leave behind a haunting silence that begs for answers and a weight of confusion that feels almost unbearable. You question yourself in ways you never have before. You start to wonder if it was your fault, if you were simply too naive, too open, too trusting. And in the depth of that pain, in the most fragile parts of your being, something quietly begins to form survival. It might not feel like it at first. In fact, it often feels like drowning. But there's a strength in you that refuses to be extinguished. It doesn't roar. It whispers. It speaks up when you think all your strength is gone. It nudges you to get out of bed when you'd rather hide. It urges you to put one foot in front of the other, even when the future feels like a blur. That strength, quiet, patient, resilient, is the foundation of your rise. The process of rising doesn't begin with confidence. It doesn't begin with empowerment. It often starts with numbness, tears, and disorientation. But deep within all of that, there's a part of you that remembers who you are, who you were before the wound, and who you're capable of becoming beyond it. And every time you choose not to let the pain define you, every time you decide not to become bitter or hardened by someone else's inability to love you properly, you're rebuilding, not in grand, dramatic moments, but in tiny, sacred ones. Maybe it's in the moment you say no for the first time without apologizing. Maybe it's when you tell your story out loud and refuse to be ashamed of it. Maybe it's when you choose rest over burnout, truth over comfort, or boundaries over people-pleasing. Those moments may seem small, but they are evidence that you are no longer living in the shadow of the hurt. They are proof that you're starting to live from a place of self-worth, not self-doubt. The person who tried to tear you down didn't realize that what they were really doing was waking up the fiercest parts of you, the parts that refused to be defined by rejection, abandonment, or pain. They didn't expect you to survive, let alone thrive. They didn't expect that your healing would make you wiser, kinder, stronger, and more self-aware than ever before. But that's what happens when you choose to rise. You become someone who is not only stronger, but someone who is more in tune with your truth than ever before. What they took was real. The pain was real. But the story doesn't end there, because there is a version of you emerging that is more powerful than the version they walked away from. A version of you that isn't afraid of starting over. A version that understands you are not meant to carry the blame for other people's emotional unavailability. A version that recognizes that being hurt doesn't make you broken. It makes you human. It's important to understand that rising doesn't mean pretending it didn't hurt. It doesn't mean smiling through the wreckage or acting like everything is okay. Rising means giving yourself permission to feel everything. The grief, the anger, the confusion, and still choosing to build a life of meaning, love, and authenticity. It means acknowledging the wound and refusing to let it become your identity. You get to define what your healing looks like. It doesn't have to follow anyone else's timeline. It doesn't have to be linear. Some days you'll feel powerful and clear, and other days you'll feel heavy and uncertain. Both are part of the process. The key is to keep going, to keep choosing yourself, to keep listening to that inner voice that says, you were not made to stay broken. The pain may have altered your path, but it didn't erase your purpose. It didn't take away your capacity to love or be loved. In fact, it expanded your empathy. It made you more attuned to the suffering of others. It taught you how to sit with pain without running from it. It gave you tools for navigating life with wisdom and integrity. That's what rising looks like. It's not flashy or loud. It's deliberate. It's sacred. It's a quiet revolution that starts inside of you and radiates outward. Your story is no longer just about what happened to you. It's about what you chose to do with that pain. You chose to learn. You chose to set boundaries. You chose to honor your intuition. You chose to surround yourself with people who uplift rather than drain you. You chose to become a safe space for yourself when others failed to be. That is no small thing. That is how we begin to change the narrative, not by erasing the past, but by writing a future that no longer echoes it. You are not weak for having been hurt. You are not foolish for having loved deeply. You are not naive for having hoped. What you are is someone who risked connection, someone who dared to be vulnerable, someone who brought your full self to the table. And when that wasn't met with the same courage, you still chose to become more of yourself rather than less. Every time you speak your truth without fear, you rise. Every time you let go of what was never yours to carry, you rise. Every time you stop shrinking to fit into spaces that were never designed to hold you, you rise. That's what real power looks like. Not domination, not control, but quiet, embodied resilience. This kind of strength doesn't need recognition from anyone. It doesn't need to be seen or validated. It lives within you. And it will carry you forward through healing. You are already becoming the version of yourself that your past self desperately needed. You are the evidence that transformation is possible. That beauty can grow from pain. That light can rise from the deepest darkness. Your rise is not accidental. It is intentional. It is sacred, and it is yours. There comes a point in your healing when you realize that waiting for someone else to write the next chapter of your life is an act of self-abandonment. It's the moment you sit with the silence that followed your pain, the unanswered questions, the apology that never came, the closure that never arrived, and you finally understand that the story is still yours. That no matter how it began, no matter who stepped in and tried to erase your voice, you have the power to pick up the pen. You have the right to reclaim the narrative and decide how it unfolds from here. For too long, pain can hold the pen. Grief writes in the margins. Shame scribbles over your self-worth. Confusion loops the same scene again and again, asking why, how, what if. And without realizing it, you become a character in your own life rather than the author. You follow old scripts. You stay quiet in places where you once would have spoken. You shrink in the presence of people who made you feel small. You replay the words and wounds of others as if they are facts, when in reality they are projections, reflections of their own limitations, not your truth. But there is something powerful that happens when you decide you're no longer available for stories that diminish you. When you no longer define yourself through the lens of someone else's inability to love, see, or respect you. When you no longer let happen to you become the ceiling for what's possible within you, that's when you begin to rewrite. And rewriting doesn't mean pretending the pain never existed. It means choosing to view the pain as a page in the story, not the entire book. It means naming the truth, acknowledging the wound, and then choosing what you do with that truth. It means shifting from asking, why did they hurt me? To asking, what am I learning about my strength, my boundaries, and my capacity to rebuild? When you rewrite your story, you stop casting yourself as the broken one. You stop identifying with the role of the victim, not because you weren't hurt, but because you're choosing to rise in the aftermath. You start seeing yourself not as someone who was left, betrayed, or used, but as someone who was honest, loving, and brave enough to show up. You change the narrative from, I was not enough, to, they were not ready for what I had to offer. You begin to tell the truth, the full truth, not the distorted version that was whispered to you through their neglect, silence, or manipulation. And here's the truth, the version of you that existed before the pain is not lost. She's still there. But now she's wiser, she's sharper, she sees the red flags more clearly. She trusts herself more deeply. She no longer waits to be chosen. She chooses herself. That version of you doesn't just survive, she evolves. She becomes. This isn't about revenge. It's not about proving anyone wrong. It's not about living out of bitterness. Rewriting your story isn't fueled by spite. It's rooted in sovereignty. It's the quiet power of deciding, day after day, that your worth is not negotiable, that your voice will no longer be silenced, that your life will no longer be dictated by the actions or absence of someone who didn't know how to handle your light. Every story has plot twists. Every story has pain. But not every story has someone brave enough to stop repeating the pattern and choose a new direction. You are that person. You are the one who gets to say, I'm not going to let what hurt me become who I am. You get to turn the page. And turning the page doesn't mean you forget what happened. It means you no longer let it be the chapter you keep reading. It means you use the lessons to inform your boundaries. You let the pain teach you what you deserve, what you won't tolerate, and how deeply you're capable of loving and healing. It means giving yourself permission to dream again, to laugh again, to open your heart again. Not because you've forgotten, but because you've decided that you are worthy of joy, even after grief. One of the most courageous things you can do is to write a life that reflects your truth, your values, your hopes, not your wounds. Because wounds may shape us, but they don't have to define us. They can become the soil where strength grows, where purpose is planted, where resilience takes root. Rewriting your story also means choosing new language. It means speaking to yourself differently. You start replacing self-blame with self-compassion. You replace harsh inner dialogue with tenderness. You stop saying, I should have known better, and start saying, I did the best I could with what I knew. You recognize that growth doesn't come from perfection. It comes from presence, from showing up even when your voice trembles, even when you feel unsure, even when you're still piecing yourself together. As you write new pages, you might find yourself becoming more protective of your peace. You might notice that you don't explain yourself as much, that you're more willing to walk away from what no longer serves you, that you take up more space, speak with more clarity, and stand taller in your truth. That's the power of owning your story. You no longer outsource your self-worth to people who didn't know how to value it in the first place. And what's beautiful is that when you start to rewrite your story, you also start to attract people who are doing the same. People who don't fear your depth. People who celebrate your healing. People who show up not because they need to fix you, but because they want to grow with you. You begin to find alignment, not because you chased it, but because you became it. There is no perfect way to heal, no clean arc, no guaranteed closure. But what's available to you right now is authorship, the right to write your own ending, the ability to say, this is who I am now, and to live accordingly. You get to decide what you carry and what you release, what you repeat and what you redefine, what you let in and what you finally let go. The pen is in your hands, not because everything has been resolved, but because you've chosen to no longer wait for resolution to begin living again, because you've decided that your past can inform your strength without dictating your future, because you've remembered that your story, at its core, was never about what someone else did to you. It was always about what you were capable of becoming after.